Hey guys, what's up? My name is Gabe and this is Games with Gabe, and this is the next episode in the Coding a 2D Game Engine in Java series. In this episode, we are going to begin integrating Box2D, a Java port, into our game engine. So you can see over here I've got a rigid body and a Box2D collider, and these are basically going to be this collider, and then it's going to have a rigid body attached to it. And in the next episode, we'll have a play button up here that we can click play, and then we will be able to use Box2D to start simulating the physics in our game world. And we'll also be adding in this thing where we can basically just right click to add in a new collider, and then we can also add in a circle collider, and you can see that all the context pops up right here. Okay, so I don't know how far we are actually going to get with all this. I don't know if we're going to get to this point because everything does take a little bit, but we'll get started and then we'll finish this up hopefully in the next episode. So first we need to integrate Box2D. Well, how do we do that? The library that we're going to be using is this JBox2D that I found, and so we can click onto its GitHub, which is right here. Tulsidas is the guy that looks like is merging pull requests, so I believe he's the author, and it's basically just jbox2d/jbox2d. And if we scroll down here, we can see that he says check out the wiki for some help. And so if we check out the wiki and look at the quick start, he basically says that he does not have anything for Gradle, which is our package that we're using. He does have Maven but not Gradle, and so he says that you can just place the jar in your project. Well, he's a little misleading here because it's not quite that easy. If we click onto code and then this 16 tags thing here, which is the way you can get to the releases now from GitHub. I don't like this new method, but this is how you get to the releases that I know of. You can go over to here and then we can go ahead. I'm gonna do 2.2.1 because this says beta and it hasn't been updated in 6 years. So we're going to go with 2.2.1 and hopefully that is stable. From what I've seen, it does look pretty stable. And we're going to click the zip and download this. I'll also have a link directly to this in the description. Download this into your downloads or wherever you want to download it to. And then just hit show in folder. That will pop this guy up, and then you can go ahead. I'm just going to rename this YouTube JBox2D so that I can show you how to do this. We'll hit extract all and then just extract all of that. If you don't have 7-zip, by the way, too, just download 7-zip or any other sort of zip manager. And then we can go ahead and click into here, and this is where all the source is going to be. It's just the code, which is kind of annoying. It's not actually the jars. So let's take a look at how to import this into IntelliJ and then extract the jars. Okay, so next thing you're going to do is just open up IntelliJ, and then you're going to go up here and hit File, New Project from Existing Sources. Navigate to wherever you download that. Just paste in the path here. Mine was in YouTube JBox2D. And then click on the folder inside of that extracted folder, which in this case is jbox2d-jbox2d-2.2.1.1. Hit OK, and also notice there's some Eclipse files in there. And then we're going to hit Import Project from External Model, which in our case is Eclipse. So just click Eclipse and then hit Next. All right. Then we want to say create the module near the .class path files. That's fine, and then we're just going to hit Next. So just leave all that default, and then this is fine too. Just leave all that and then hit Next. Hit Next again. Everything is fine. Hit Finish with 1.8 as your source. If you want to use something else, you can. It's going to give you that warning. That's fine. Just hit OK, and then it should open up into a new project. Okay, so now that we have this project open, we're going to be working over here to get this to work. So in order to get this to work, we sort of have to jumpstart this a little bit. If you right click on jbox2d testbed.joggle, J-O-G-L, and then if you hit the build, it's going to say cannot start the compiler. The SDK is not specified. So we'll hit OK there. Then it's going to say that it's trying to use Java Standard Edition 1.6, which is not what I want to use. I want to use 1.8. So just switch that and then click up here, switch this to 1.8 or whatever version you're using, and then do that for all of these. And once you go through and fix all that, you can go down, and this button right here is the OK button. It's kind of small on my screen, but if I hit that, then that should switch all of those. And then we're going to right click here again, and then we're going to hit Build. Okay, and so then you'll notice that we get a bunch of errors because it's saying all these things don't exist. Okay, and so to fix that, if you just go ahead and right-click this pom.xml file inside of the directory here, if you right-click that, and then if you hit add as Maven file, it will show that down here. I clicked it already, so now I just see add as amp build file, but if you click that, then that should fix up all the errors and it should build when you go ahead and you click build module, and then everything should go fine. Then if you just click into source main Java, this is just to make sure that whatever you have is working correctly. Right click on this main and then hit run testbed.main. And if you run this, you should get something that looks like this. And you can sort of go through, it has some help here, and then you can go through and test a bunch of different things. So like if you hit the right brackets 2, I believe, it switches tests. So you'll see that these are some dominoes. Go through this. This is all the things that we will be able to add to our engine, the functionality. And it looks kind of weird, but that's because he's using Java's built-in GUI. But ours will look like our engine and we'll just be able to use this physics, okay? So if that all worked, then that means that this is working for you, so you should be good. Now we'll go up to here and then right-click JBox2D library and hit build. Just make sure that this builds. You'll see it's doing some stuff up here. Okay, so it's not building. And for some reason, I realized this when I was doing it. He has a duplicate package in here. I'm not quite sure what the reason for that was, but I just deleted this GWTE mole. So I just deleted that. And if you build it now, it should build fine. So if we just run this one more time, build, then you should notice it's almost working. And then if you right click on the pom.xml, we have to add this as a Maven project, and then that should resolve all the dependencies. Now if we hit build, it should finally build this. Okay, so now it is building and that all worked. Okay, good. So now that you can build this, we need to make sure that this outputs a jar so that we can use it. So in order to do that, we need to go ahead and hit Control-Alt-Shift-S, and that will open up this library. This is the project structure, okay? Go to artifacts. This is where you can basically say, hey, I want you to output a jar. We'll hit plus to add a new jar. And then I'm going to actually do this from modules with dependencies. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on JBox2D-library because that's the one we want to create a jar from. We don't have a main class because this is just a library, so just leave that as is, then we'll hit OK. That should do everything for us. Hit apply, hit OK. So to build the artifact now, what we have to do is you have to go up here, click build, and then hit build artifacts, and we want to make sure to build JBox2D library jar. So just double click that, and that should begin the build process, and I believe it finished. The way to check is just to go into the folder, and you should have an out directory now. Click into that, click artifacts, and then just keep clicking, and you'll run into this JBox2D library jar. Okay, so now we have the jar. Now we want to make sure to add that to our project. So go to your project for our game engine, which in my case is in C Dev Java Mario Dev branch. Okay, go into there and then go ahead. Actually, mine is inside of Mario YouTube. And then we're going to go ahead and create a new folder, Control-Shift-N, call this libs, and then we're just going to move this jar into the libs folder. Okay? Now we have the jar. So I'm going to exit out of this. And I'm going to exit out of this by opening up our project, which is this Mario YouTube. So I'm going to just hit open this into this window. And now if you remember where we left off, I believe, yeah, we just left off with like these things, and we can sort of pick colors and all that stuff. So that's all good. Now we want to import this file into our Gradle project, right? And so the way we do that is if we go into our build.gradle file, which is at the bottom here, we're going to have to basically tell it, hey, we have a jar that we are adding manually to the Gradle. And so the way we do this is we first say, hey, there's a flat directory, which just basically means there's a directory on my machine, and the directory's name is libs, okay? So that corresponds to the libs folder we just created, right? So we're just telling it, hey, there's a directory called libs, and then inside of that directory called libs, we have this jar called jbox2d-library.jar, right? And so we can tell it that we have that, and I'm going to go down here and just say box2d, and we can tell it we have that by just saying implementation name and then jbox2d-library. And then if you hit import changes down here, we should be able to import those, and I believe that was fine. Let's open up that window just to make sure. Okay, yeah, so if you open up the build window and it says configure successful, you're good. That all worked, okay? So now we have the implementation in there and we have access to this file. Now we have to actually start adding all of the stuff that we're going to need. So first of all, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and just collapse this and this and this and this. So if you're following the Physics2D series, you'll know that I have this package called Physics2D. I'm going to go ahead and just refactor this and rename it to Physics2D temp. And I'm just going to hit refactor. That should rename everything. Then I'm going to go into here and create another package, call this Physics2D. So Physics2D temp is temporary because I'm only using that to teach you guys how to build a physics engine. It's not meant to be a final physics engine. This is going to be the wrapper around the actual library that we just imported the jar for. Okay, this Physics2D package. So now we're going to go into this Physics2D package and we're going to create a new class, call that Physics2D. This is basically going to be our wrapper around everything, sort of like our renderer class inside of our renderer. So inside of this Physics2D package, we're going to need a couple different things. We're going to need an update method. So we'll take in a float, delta time. Then we are also going to need a few variables that we will use to update our physics engine. So we will do private vec2. And the reason we're doing this vec2 is because we're using it from JBox2D. So this is their math type. And we're going to say this is gravity equals a new vec2, 0, -10. Okay. So you can figure out sort of what types they use by just typing in the names that you expect their types to be. And the way I know what I'm doing right now too, by the way, is by going to Box2D's actual website. So if we look at Box2D and we zoom this in a little bit, then we can go to documentation. And then if you look at Hello Box2D and creating a world, we'll just jump into here and see what happens. Okay, yeah, so if you go into here, then there's a bunch of these things. So we have this bvec2, this b2 world. I'm literally just following this tutorial, okay? So he gives you a tutorial on how to use Box2D, and it's very similar in the Java port that we have, except just minus the b2 in the front of all of these types, okay? So this is how I'm figuring out what I'm about to do here. So we're gonna need a private world, okay? And that equals a new world, and we're going to use gravity, right? So this world just uses this gravity. And then I'm going to have a variable that we're going to use, public float physics time, and this is just so that we can keep our physics time going in a continuous concrete interval, right? We want it to go at 60 frames per second. And I'm going to create another thing here, call this private float physics time step equals 1 over 60, so 1.0 over 60. And that's just 1/60th of a second. We want it to go 60 frames per second, our physics, okay? I'm just going to go ahead and indent that one more and then say private int, and this is going to be our physics. Well, we'll just call this velocity iterations, and I think I set this to 8, and then private int position iterations, and this is set to 3. And the reason we have to set these is because Box2D uses this thing called a iterative impulse resolver. So it uses a certain amount of iterations for the position and the velocity to resolve those whenever collisions happen. And we have to provide how many iterations. The more you have, the better your physics will be, but the slower it will run. So this is a good happy medium. I think I pulled this from their website. I'm not sure where I got these numbers from. Pulling this from my actual game engine, which is where I got it. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say physics time plus equals dt. If physics time is greater than or equal to 0, then we're going to say physics time minus equals physics time step. And then we're going to say world.step physics time step. And then if we control P, we can see we need velocity iterations and position iterations. Okay, so what am I doing here? Well, basically what we want to happen is we want to make sure we update our physics only once every 60 frames, right? But our game engine could technically run 0.16 milliseconds frame 1, and I guess that's seconds. So it could run 16 milliseconds frame 1, it could run 17 milliseconds frame 2, it could run 20 milliseconds frame 3, and then go 14 milliseconds frame 4. It's not going to be stable, okay? And so what we do to combat that is we basically keep track of where we're at. So we'll say we'll start off at 0, then we'll add in whatever delta time for this time step was. So say that was 16 milliseconds. Now all of a sudden we're at 16 milliseconds, so we have to make sure we subtract that. So then we'll say 16 milliseconds minus 16 milliseconds. And we're subtracting this because we have gone inside this loop because we were greater than or equal to 0. So then we step the world by 16 milliseconds because we have indeed gone that much. Then let's say next frame is 14 milliseconds. Well, then we go 14 minus 16, which equals -2. So now we're at -2. So then the next frame, we won't update the physics because we haven't actually gone through 16 milliseconds yet. So then next frame, let's say, is 16 milliseconds. Then it would be -2 plus 16, which equals 14. And then we would get enough for an update. So then we would update, and then we would say, okay, 14 minus 16, and that is -2. And then basically the process repeats. So we're just sort of incrementing only once we've passed 16 milliseconds is all this is doing. So we may skip a frame or two when we're updating the physics, and that's perfectly fine because that may be needed. Okay, let's go ahead and add the components that we're going to need. I'm going to go into here and create a new package and call this components. And I'm going to create another new package and call this enums. So we're going to need one enum, and we're going to create a new Java class, call that body type. This is basically just going to be the body types that we could have, which are static, dynamic, and kinematic. Okay, and these are just straight from Box2D. We're just creating our own types so that users of our engine can use these types, okay? Then we're going to go into components, create a new class. We'll call this rigid body 2D. I'm going to hit add that to Git. And this class will take a private vector 2f, velocity equals a new vector 2f. It will have a angular damping, which I will initialize to 0.8, and we can tweak all these initial values in the future once we can actually start using this. We'll say linear damping equals 0.9f, say private float mass equals 0, private body type equals, import that from where we just created that class, physics2d.enums, and then we'll say body type equals body type dot dynamic, and then we'll say private boolean fixed rotation equals false private boolean continuous collision equals false, and then, or actually true, and then we'll say private body raw body equals null. Okay, these are just sort of all the variables that we're going to need to wrap around JBox2D. So they need the velocity, angular damping, linear damping, mass, body type, fixed rotation, and continuous collision. These are all the settings that we'll be able to set, right? And we'll want to be able to set those inside of our components. I'm also going to go ahead and create getters and setters for all these. So if we go to code and then generate, we're going to say getter and setter, and then we just want to create one for every single variable. So do that. That should be good. And then we're going to go ahead and say that this extends component, because we will want to use this as a actual component. And we'll also go ahead and override public void update float delta time. And this update method will say if raw body does not equal null. So if we have added this to Box2D and we're updating this, then we'll say this dot game object dot transform dot position dot set, and then we need to say raw body dot get position dot x and raw body dot get position dot y. And I will explain why we're doing this in just a second. We will also need to do this dot game object transform rotation equals raw body dot get angle, and we'll want to convert this to degrees. So we'll say math.2 degrees, and then just wrap that in that call and cast it to a float. All right, so why do we do this in the update method? Well, basically, since we're wrapping around a library, that library uses its own types. So we basically have to create its type, which we're calling the raw body. We pass that to the game engine, or to the physics engine. Physics engine uses this, optimizes it, does whatever it does with it. Then inside of here, every frame, we make sure that we're matching what the physics engine says. So if the physics engine changed the transform in the last frame, then we match the frame, the position, to whatever his position is. Okay, so that's why we have that. Let's go ahead and just create a new class, call this Box2D Collider. We'll hit add, and then create another new class, call this Circle Collider, hit add, and then we'll just say this extends component. and we can just import that and then do the same thing here. Extends component. All right, import that as well. Okay. Then we'll just go into here, say private float radius equals 1 by default. Alt enter, create getter and setter. All right, so that's getter setter, and then inside here once again we'll say private vector2 half size, and then we'll say create getter setter. That should be good, and we'll initialize this to new vector2f1. Okay, so this is sort of the basis of everything that we're going to need. We're running a little bit long here, and that's because there's just a lot of stuff that we have to do. So in the next episode, we're going to continue to work on this and hopefully get the rest of our stuff running so that we will have what I showed you in the beginning of this, which is the ability to click onto here, and we can sort of edit these things, and it edits them in the viewport, and then we can click onto one, add a rigid body, and it adds a rigid body, all that stuff. And then we'll also hopefully add in a play button here so that we can play the physics simulation and see it working. I did just want to mention too that I'm sorry for not releasing lately. The reason I haven't released is because last week I got sick with COVID. I was planning on releasing a video and then got horribly sick the same day, so I had to put it off, unfortunately. But we should be back to a semi-regular schedule. Work is still pretty tough, and it's hard to find motivation this time of year because of how busy things are and everything. But hopefully I will be releasing more often from now on. Also, we are very close to 1,000 subscribers, guys, and I'll probably release a standalone video once that happens, but I did just want to say thank you. That is absolutely incredible, and I'm so happy and thankful for every single one of you guys. So that is it for this tutorial, though, guys. I'll see you in the next one once we start continuing this stuff. Thanks. See ya.